In this episode, we talk through how we created a collective circular collaboration which had the power to unearth the energy pattern of humanity. Notice the many different perspectives among the three of us. It is these points of differences that bring that collective together.
So us three together unearthed the energy pattern of humanity. So I thought this one we would have a discussion about how we were able to do that and why couldn't anyone do it, because we've been working together for about 3 years now, but we've each done a lot of work before that. And so I thought I'd throw that out open. But I thought I would also share that this is our plan for each one of our podcasts. We've got 7 podcasts, and you'll see that the little dots in the middle are the 7 dots of the podcast, and they're all connected. And somehow viewers may watch all 7, or they might just watch a couple. And this around is how we organise them, I suppose. It's not really organise. It's each of these sheets of paper represents one of us. So the purple is Storm over there, so we're in the right order. Bryn is the green one here, and I'm the gold one here. Now we're all communicating with love, right? Because that is actually the core of humanity, is actually we are all connected through the care we have for everyone and everything. And my role in these podcasts are these bits. So I throw in inspirational little bits and pieces. Little nuggets, as Bryn calls them. Storm over here, she likes to flow. So she likes to add to one of my nuggets, and sort of then sometimes we'll do a deep dive and go down deep. Sometimes she'll start her own and go really deep, and sometimes she just flows around it a little bit. And Bryn here, he's like this tree and provides the structure and protection for each of us. And he goes in and out of stuff and likes to really cement things into the everyday reality for people. Because Storm and I can sometimes be too up there,
Yep.
and around the place. So you'll notice that this is our detailed plan of how we do stuff, and it's in picture form. The reason I do everything in pictures. That's how I work out my entire life, is in pictures. And sometimes when you use words, it gets a bit more confusing. So I'd like to throw it to either one of you. How did you get here to be working with me? Because I started Wisdom in Your Life in 1999. And this is the first time I've actually been able to have a true collective circular collaboration with people to create. Not just for me to teach. It's really coming together to create something new. So,
any thoughts first, Bryn?
No.
Okay, I'll go.
Off you fly.
It's interesting when you said at the beginning around I don't know where to start, and today we're talking about communicating our knowing or from our knowing. For me, there is no end or beginning to it. We often think that we're born and then we learn. I have a sense, and I am almost certain that many people around the world have a sense that they were born with knowing from previous wherever. And I definitely align with that. I have always been connected to my knowing. And one of my earliest memories was a couple of experiences. One was first of all, I always knew that I was going to meet a collective like this and an individual, right, who was sitting on such knowledge, such knowing, such wisdom. I knew that in my childhood. And because you're a child, you don't have words for it, you don't have a language, you're like, this doesn't make sense. But it didn't need to, because I just knew it deep, deep down inside. And throughout my entire life, my inner knowing, which I used to refer to as my hum, would vibrate differently depending if I was making choices or on a path that was either taking me further away from where I am now or closer to it. So that I always knew. And I always knew that attached to that there is wisdom to be unlocked and potential within me to be unlocked. So I knew I had potential. I needed to find the space to unlock and explore that potential. What I've recognized over time is that I've had to unlearn a whole lot of false beliefs that kept me back and somewhat afraid of that potential, and all of the stories that we end up telling ourselves, right? That we pick up from society. Again, whether it was communicated directly, most of it was not. It was always an unconscious messaging around their false beliefs and blah, 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 blah type stuff. So that's one knowing that I always had. And just on the back end of that, so when I was in early high school, I did an assignment on, I forgot his name. Relativity. Einstein. So I did an assignment on Einstein, right? And that was because when I was little, I knew I wanted to be really, really smart, and he was the smartest scientist I'd known, at that time. So I'd done an assignment on him, knowing one day I would meet my Einstein later in life, right? Because I had this from the beginning. So anyway, that's that story. My other knowing is when I experienced and was exposed, first time. There was other times as well, but this one was the first time. So I can't remember if I was 5 or 7 and I was sitting in class, and I rarely tell this story, so this is me practicing telling my story now. So I was
everyone that's going to watch this.
To everyone who watches this. This is a sacred story of mine, and only special people have had the privilege of knowing this story, so it's out. I was about 5 or 7, like I said, I can't remember, and I was sitting at my desk in class, and I had the pencil, and it was a square desk, and I had my head on the table, and I was looking at the piece of paper. So say this is the edge of the table, and I had the paper, and I just thought, if I move the piece of paper halfway to the edge of the table, and I did, and then I go half again, always half a distance, right? I was like, you never actually get to a destination if you only ever travel half of a distance, right? Whoa.
So that's one of the definitions of infinity.
Right.
The infinite.
Right. And then in my mind, in my whole body, I travelled somewhere else. I was not in the classroom, and literally this is what happened. My mind fell off the desk. That is the best way to explain it. My whole being fell off the desk. So it went psh. But before I got there, the thought process was, you never actually get to a destination. Therefore, nothing in life actually touches anything, because there's always space in between. And then at this young age, I remember I picked up my hand and I was like, in my head, while I'm in the classroom, does that mean my nails are not attached to my fingers? or my hair is not attached into my head, or my clothes not on my body, but then what am I feeling when my clothes are rubbing against my body? And that's when I fell off the desk into space, right? So what I experienced is that I went, now I understand, into the beyond, because I know what I know now. And I saw lots of swirly colours and squiggly lines, and they were all floating, like, if you think of, the best way I can describe it, as like a vacuum, and then you have some light things in there and they just move with the vacuum space, right? That's what was happening with all these colours and squiggly lines and spirals. And I was like, and they were doing this, and I'd come to a conclusion, which was my knowing at the time, that these things that I was seeing were moving and vibrating, and we were feeling the vibration, but they weren't touching. And so that's as far as I got at that time. Later in life, I was sitting in front of the TV watching a space documentary, and I can't remember if it was I'm pretty sure it was the Hubble. They faced the Hubble into this black spot in space, and then they found all of these colours that I had seen and travelled to when I was younger. And I remember the experience for me, I sat there on the floor on the carpet watching the TV going, what is happening right now? Because it was like I was transported back to when I fell off the table. And they were actually talking about string theory, as well as this thing in space, right? And I was like, have I experienced, did I discover in my own way string theory, right, when I was younger? And so, and also the beyond. What I realise now through the work, through wisdom, is that is where I've always gone for my knowing that I can travel to, as well as it always being inside speaking to me as well.
So does that beyond then come through into you, so then you can communicate that knowing?
Yeah. So I have had to practice, because it actually comes through when I go to the beyond, it comes through here, right? Here physically on my body. But my knowing communicates from here. So I know it here, but I can't communicate it from here. I have to communicate it from here. And the work that wisdom has done, and I have done through wisdom, is connecting the mind, the body, and the spirit, right? Now I am able to communicate my knowing, because all of those three are, one, connected and integrated, but two, in relation and connected to either the person or the people next to me who I'm communicating with, and also considerate of the surrounding that I'm in. So it's, for me, a full tapestry, in a way, of connections and threads between myself, my inner outer world, and my surroundings.
And other people.
And other people, yeah. And then when I can communicate through all of those connections, that's when I'm communicating my knowing. And people hear the essence of my message. I may not always get the words entirely right, but it's definitely made a difference to how I communicate and how people receive my communication as well. And that's only been solidified in the last couple of years as well. Before, I remember I was quite frustrated. I'm like, no one's listening to me, I'm communicating. No, I was saying the words.
Yes.
And I had to do the integration.
Which is a really interesting concept, is that the words not connected to our deepest knowing, and you talk about your deepest knowing in the beyond. Mine is not in the beyond. My knowing has come from deep underground. I call it beneath the beneath.
Yeah.
That's where my knowing comes from. And so, yeah, other people's knowing will come from different places. And I have the knowing of how life works. And that is all I have. and I need the collective of other people to bring in the knowing from the different places, if you like, of it. And that is actually how we were able to do the work we've just done in unearthing the energy pattern of humanity.
Yeah.
I could not have done that alone. Neither could you, and neither could you.
No.
And yeah, so how about you, your experience?
I just want to finish off, from that for me it's absolutely true that I couldn't have done it without you guys, because otherwise I'm just walking around with all this knowing in my head, not connected in my belly, and I'm not sharing it with anyone. Therefore, I'm not able to integrate it. Also, what I know now is that a power of mine is facilitation. So I also facilitate myself when I'm with you both.
Yes.
And I'm sharing that.
Yeah. That's really succinct, and you communicated it really well.
Thanks.
And because that's part of what, because the first step for everyone is the connection. And because the connection actually heals our minds, because our minds are where it all starts, really. And in our mind, if it's fragmented or isolated or anything, it's not flowing. And it's only once our mind is connected and a little bit integrated that then we can connect our mind to our body, and then our body to our spirit or soul. And it's only when all three of those are connected and integrated that we can actually grow and connect to our knowing. And so it's a very important aspect. Otherwise, where is your knowing coming from? And it's like what you said, in your head you know it, but you couldn't communicate it until it's in your body. And when we try to communicate stuff that we've just heard from someone else, and we don't bring it in and test it, it's just opinion. And it's meaningless.
Yeah.
And so how about you, Bryn? Because you came from a very different...
Well, I came at it from, if we look at the energy patterns of the company, I came at it from a different place.
Yes.
The two probably drivers and two threads that I'll share are around patterns and wisdom. So wisdom's probably where I overlap with you. But deepest knowing is not. It was more patterns. So we'll start with patterns. I always sensed that there were patterns to how things were unfolding. My first real experience, as I've spoken about often, is boarding school. I could see how, you didn't want to be the focus of attention. I could see how if you got involved upstream in something, that would lead to a place in time and space where you would end up being the focus of attention, which you didn't want, because it was physical and emotional bullying, right? So what were the things that happened that got you to that place? And by avoiding those upstream, those earlier parts in the pattern that would play out, avoiding those meant that you never got there. So it's a great way to avoid, right? Which is a topic, isn't it? And then when I left school, there was a bit of this went on at university, but then when I went to become a management consultant for 15 years, I'd see similar patterns play out. What was going on underneath, how it was flowing, was very similar, but the way it showed up was different, and it had a bigger time scale to it, because boarding school was quite compressed. But even then,
So do you think boarding school was a microcosm of the businesses?
Yeah, on one level,
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very much so.
Yeah.
And they're more compact and condensed, so you could go through iterations.
Yeah, and just picking up on your thing about avoidance, so once people have grown up and they've learnt to avoid these situations upstream, as you talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that in businesses, a lot of people avoid to stop that from happening, but it's still happening because...
Yeah, well, it would certainly explain why management of risk is such a prevalent thing, even though, with the greatest respect, it adds little value to the functioning of a business.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people disagree with me.
Yeah.
But there is some risk, which is worth, but a vast majority, and it would explain that, because we're trying to avoid things.
Yeah.
As opposed to allowing things to, evolve and emerge and create, which we'll come on to later. So I'd see that in workplaces, but the difference being now is I'm older, and in a consultative role I'm supposed to be turning up and adding value and all of that, performing monkey. And so in trying to solve problems in the business area, I'd be almost sensing and feeling deeper patterns. To start with in my career, it was difficult to articulate why certain solutions which were highly rational, data driven, best practice rollout process, etc., great IT systems, etc., wouldn't work, or would see an increase in productivity and then a net loss over a bigger period of time that was probably beyond what the initial change project was going to measure. That was difficult to explain. It's difficult to articulate, because I was communicating something that was much, much deeper.
Yeah.
But I knew it was going on. And
so that was your knowing. You knew what was going on.
Well,
but you had difficulty communicating.
Yes, it was. And it was knowing through experience. I've seen this, I've witnessed this, here we go again. And a lot of other people would agree with me, but they didn't seem to find it as important as me. Like, to me, it was just bonkersly important, because what's the point in getting involved in doing something if you know inevitably it's going to fail? Why don't you get involved and do something because you know it's going to be robust and serve the purpose it's supposed to here in the world? And so I'd see this, and then as I approached 40, it wasn't so much that these patterns were happening out there anymore, they were happening in here now. And as I've spoken about often in many other places, like, then I saw implosions in my own life, in relationships, even in that consulting career as well. And so I was like, whoa, there are definitely patterns going on. And these are really, really deep. Like, I remember sitting in my crappy little place in South Freo with this sense of, after these implosions and things had happened, like, whoa, there is like the super, super deep waters of Bryn, and I've gone so far away from it. And things have conspired to take me away, and patterns and da-da-da-da-da. But I've been pulled back with a big old slap. And so then the next place for me was to go and try and learn more about that. And no university wants to talk about patterns and things like that, and I couldn't find any books. The closest thing was reading Carl Jung. Found some interest in there, but there was nothing that was like, that's it. So I went off and talked to lots of people and did the podcast for 4 years, and that was brilliant, because you listen to people's story week in, week out, week in, week out, week in, week out, week in, week out. And consciously I was trying to keep up with what I was learning, but I just let go of that after a while and just kept doing it, and then stuff would again make sense. So
do you think that was connecting to your deepest knowing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. But again, it was still out there, because there's other people's stories, but still really super useful. And then, well, I met you through the podcast, but you were the only person that ever asked me why I was really, really, really doing it. Right? Everybody else nobody really asked me. Everyone just presumed. It was like, well, they put on it whatever they wanted to put on it, right? He's doing it to be, a face or a clever person, or build a network, or try and make a business out of it. I never made any money out of it. It cost me a lot of money, that thing. But again, it was so valuable. And that was interesting too, because it was like, must keep going, there's something in here. And something in here was the knowing it gave me, and then meeting yourself, and you were the only person who asked me, what's it about? And I said, there are patterns. And then, we ended up having the podcast, and then after that, it was like, this is it. Somebody's actually talking about the patterns. Somebody's actually spent time surfacing the patterns. Someone's actually got visualizations of the patterns. Whoa, someone's actually created workshops around the patterns that are over 20 years old and is actually doing stuff in the world to correct these things and stuff like that. And to me, it was like, that's it, off I go. It was no brainer after that.
Yeah.
And the more I started, the more I started hanging around and you couldn't get rid of me, and the more I put myself through the pattern that we are designed as humans to follow, like the map, just even at a basic level, the more life started to move with ease and grace. The more I started to see things play out, the less I was pulled into it. And in that sort of quiet or calm space of not being pulled into it, I suddenly got this deeper sense of, through the compass and stuff, this is me in this. And once I could tap into this space, and through watching the outside world, and it's not just from seeing a map, but also, practicing it, which then takes us to the wisdom map part. I got this deep sense of knowing. It's like, and the great thing was I could then properly tap into my history and go, wow, look at the rich library catalogue of knowing that this has given me, even though, only getting to a place of ease and grace and finding out who you are when you're in your mid-40s, it's like, well, what the fuck I've been doing for the first part of my life, and I went through all of that, but now I look at it and go, kind of, that was how it had to be. I think the wisdom aspect, I always from a child gravitated to older people who could tell me about how life worked.
Yeah.
Right from the get-go. The challenge for me was, like we said, wisdom is knowledge, lived experience, and then put into a practice, right? And I think particularly, from about 14, 15 onwards, I would be attracted to bodies of wisdom or stuff like that. But it was just, and it would happen in my 20s and probably into my early 30s. But it was just too quick, too early. I hadn't had the lived experience to meet that. And so I would interact with stuff, and then it would almost violently repel me with dramas or stuff in my life. And I always got this deep sense of knowing then, it's like, ooh, you just tinkered with something you're not ready for, lad. Right? It's like, repel, off you go. Right, you had a little glimpse, probably a bit too much of a glimpse off your pot. But even in that, it was the practice element. I was always okay-ish with it, but it was a bit misguided. I didn't connect them all up. And it was when, again, I remember doing like the map and then meeting you for a conversation, and you're almost going, all right, so where's the painting around this? And I was like, oh, fuck yeah, that's what I've got to do, haven't I? I've got to actually
practice it.
So I was like, oh yeah, this is what we do. Bang, so off we go. And for someone whose power is around wisdom, my key is around wisdom, sorry. That knowledge, lived experience, and practice, and balancing the three, so they feed each other, and this, that, and the other, has just gone. And from that, knowing has just burst into the world for me. And it's a very calm thing. It's always when I talk, my knowing, much like you, comes from here. My voice is quieter. It's a lot quieter. And those that need to listen actually put things down and listen. For somebody who's used to, as we joke about, had his deck of his boat filled full of equipment, like all the knowledge. When which wasn't mine to hold or didn't suit me. And I had, the amount of times I would talk through my...
Yeah, it's interesting because you're talking about too much stuff.
Yeah.
And you talked about the unlearning. And so some of the process isn't just learning new stuff, it's getting rid of stuff that doesn't serve us.
Oh yeah, I remember the first year of hanging out here, it was just emptying.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, well, when I reference the unlearning, I never actually picked up a whole lot of stuff, tools, and put them on my boat, right?
Yeah.
Or all of the strategies that we're taught, try this. I actually was very cutthroat dismissive, and it was like my inner knowing just knew nope. And I often struggled with, oh, you've got such an ego storm, right? Because I would just dismiss, not openly, but I would dismiss, and not read a book that I was told to read. I would not do this, right? I would read the back.
Yeah.
No, that person doesn't know me enough, or whatever it is that I told myself. So my unlearning was actually all of the internal narratives that I then internalized that kept me less than. And that's the unlearning I had to do to open the door of my potential. That was my unlearning. I actually never picked up a whole lot of stuff. And I walked through life thinking I was super dumb, or I sounded dumb, but at the same time had this great knowing that I just couldn't share because I'd not learned the tools to share. And that was the tools and the strategies that I picked up here.
Yeah. And so, you grew up in an English boarding school, per se. You grew up on Aboriginal country, and how the two of you have come together to be with me, who, as I'm listening to you, I'm really reflecting on that, I actually knew the underlying pattern that connects everything and everyone since I was about 5 or 6 years old. And
did you know it to articulate it? Or?
No.
Right.
But I just knew it, and I just assumed everyone else knew this. And so why were people doing these stupid things? Because of course that would happen.
Yep.
Of course that would happen. Yep. And so then I was like, it was such a deep knowing. I thought, well, someone must know it. And that's led me to go to university. Like, I went all the way up to a PhD, and it was just like, and everything was just a little bit of a fragment of my whole knowing.
It's interesting you had to go to these external institutions to...
Well, because it's about credibility.
Yeah.
Who's going to listen to a 5 or 6 year old go, I know the pattern of life. I know how life works.
I think one of the things that podcast did do for me was, having what some may refer to as a cliche midlife crisis with these implosions and things like that I talked about. I did get to a place where I was like, well, hang on a minute, big boy, you've got all this education, bachelor's in psychology, master's in business science, read all this stuff. You're supposed to be a clever lad, right? Yet if life is in tatters, there was a really challenging part of just sitting there and going, do you know what? I have no idea who I am, how I work in the world, and I don't think I understand how the world works. Or actually, such was that it pulled everything that it was like, I think I'm getting a sense of how the world works, and it's not this, right?
Yeah. And I think that's...
And going to the podcast was almost the way of... Because there was part of me that wanted to go to university to start learning something new again, but I got repelled from that. And what the podcast gave me was this sense of, well, do you know what? I actually go and listen to people every week.
Yeah.
And I've been doing this for like a year, 2 years, 100 episodes, 150 episodes. So it gave me this... I think that's when I first started tapping into a sense of knowing through doing and practicing of something that wasn't necessarily the traditional, or
Yep.
you haven't been to university to learn this. It's like,
Yeah.
no, I sat and listened to people.
Yeah, and you know, for us coming from such diverse backgrounds, diverse knowledge, I suppose, diverse experiences and all that, how we could come together and actually allow the three of us to work as a one unit. And this is what I suppose is the next stage, is because humanity is the way we learn, the way we do things has to be through a collective circular collaboration. But for us to do this, you know, you had to unlearn your internal dialogues. You had to unlearn the external knowledge that you were given,
Yeah.
right? And until we do that, we're going to be basing collectives on false information, false beliefs, or we're basing it on trauma.
Yep.
You know, I blew up my life, I imploded, or basing it on ego. And so, you know, and I think when we actually did unearth the energy pattern of humanity, and we went through the process and we did drawings, we did paintings, and it slowly emerged. And then you would add something and we would listen, and it's a very active listening. But I think fundamentally under all of that is that we trust. So I trust that Storm gets her knowing from beyond. I trust that I get my knowing from beneath the beneath. You didn't talk about where you get your knowing from, but I think it's through practice.
Yeah.
Right? And so you sort of ground us into the everyday reality of, yes, I can practice this. Oh no, that doesn't work for me.
How can I fold that into something I can do?
Yeah, and so together we do create this collective circular collaboration. And going forward, we really need, you know, so many other places to have these collective circular collaborations, whether it's in business, whether it's in community, whether it's in your family. And it's so important because it's so enriching for not just us, but for our families and the people we interact with. So I think that's really what I wanted to say in this episode of the podcast, is that the people coming into the collective need to be really, really clear, connect their mind and body and spirit. They need to have, I suppose, an emptiness to actually hear others. They need to be grounded, which can be hard for Storm and me. We need to be centered with and we need to be balanced. And until people get to there, trying to build a collective circular collaboration is going to be fraught with difficulties. So do you guys want to add anything to that?
Yes.
Of course.
For me, I often say my answer to everything is yes and no, right? And that there's truth in everything, right? Absolutely, I agree that we have been able to get where we have gotten together because there is a trust. And one of the active things that I practice is, even if I don't connect with someone on multiple levels, I am open, empty, and trust that that person has wisdom that I don't have. And that is an active thing for me to practice beyond my ego, which I've explained in the past has always kind of been there as a dismissive thing. And so I think I've always been somewhat good at listening. I've always been quiet and the observer, the typical title of the observer in the room kind of thing. However, I can observe things and then know things, but actually be in a room and experience it with my whole body and my essence of me is something that I practice. And I've realized that it actually holds safe space for people to drop their nuggets within a space, right?
Yes.
And then I'm like, there it is.
Yeah.
So it's like I'm waiting for that. And I can't remember the quote, but Jung says something like, our first, when we project expectations on other people, it's a negative, and then it stops that wisdom from the other person, something like that.
Yeah.
And that has made a huge shift for me, is allowing the potential in others, but also believing in the potential of others.
Well,
whether you communicate that or not, it's just...
And I suppose that's because you talked about expectations of others. I have, I suppose, an expectation that everyone has this deepest knowing. And for everyone that I worked with over the last 30, 40 years, it's getting people to connect to that.
And that's not a belief, that's a universal truth.
Yeah, but it started out when I first started working, was like, why don't other people see that? That everyone is born knowing something.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Something that I don't know. And so, and I've often said, I will stop seeing clients in my psychology practice when I stop learning stuff from them.
Yeah.
Because I am connecting to their knowing. And so, and yet so few people do this.
I think, again, drawing back from my podcast experience helps to give a nice tangible example of what we've just talked about and what we did to unearth this as well, because over the 200 episodes, I would say that 180 of those were me holding the space, because like you said, I knew that if I hold a space, ask some questions, shut up, let people talk, ask another one, just take a bit further down and further down and further down. Oh, that's interesting. Explain that more. That at different points, didn't matter who they were, what I felt about them as a person, because we connect with people and don't, and sometimes you think, the topics were varied, and sometimes I was like, what the hell are we talking about? But in there somewhere, there'd be golden nuggets of wisdom. And there wasn't a single episode where that didn't flow. The thing with that, though, that was great for the first 180 episodes, but then I changed, because I would change every cohort of, and it would be subtle. I would notice it while I was sitting with people. And then I changed fundamentally, because instead of one talking to two and two dropping out the nuggets, I started to get this vague glimpse of one talking to two, and the two of us made three. And three was super interesting. And I got there for moments with some people, and then it would close. Or it would open and then it would close. And I generally felt like it was the other person that closed it, because I was quite happy to stay open and see where it went, even if it trod on the toes of some sacred cows that I hold, right? I was still happy to go, oh, okay, yeah, well, let's see how this settles within me while we're doing it and afterwards. So getting curious about this, and this was probably within 6 and 9 months before meeting Ros, I decided, because I was into experimenting and trying stuff out, I decided to create something called Nuance Club, right? A Nuance Club was my attempt to get 5 or 6 people together, because if 1 and 2 make 3, and 3 is this big, right? If we get 5 or 6 people, then 7, right, let's say we've got 6, 7's going to be this big, right, and it's going to be mega. And having experienced it, and the fact that you know people can come together and create a space for amazing things to emerge in a world where we're so used to individuals coming up with the answers, but we're at the end of that now. You know, the solutions are not coming from the individual mental horsepower of one person.
Not an Einstein.
No, it's not going to be an Einstein. It's going to be a collective that are going to birth solutions. And so I had a deep sense of knowing that that's how the world was going, what the world needed or humanity needed to move forward. So I tried it out. So, you know, I put it out there and various people said, yeah, I'd love to be a part of it. So I had 5 people, and I even sat and explained in exactly the words that I've just used, that I've had this experience, I reckon if 5 people come together, we do that. And so we agreed to meet. I think it was every Wednesday night for 5 weeks, and it was a spectacular failure. Absolute. We never got anywhere near a felt sense of something emerging in the thing, because despite the fact you can tell them, and despite the fact everybody cognitively and rationally got it right, we couldn't go anywhere near anything that was emotive. We couldn't go anywhere near something that trod on people's beliefs, because it just got shut down. And I think I worked out that it was a spectacular failure within 2 to 3 sessions, and it wasn't going to come round, but, you know, had it out. Yep. So, you know, back to your point about, we really do need to be able to have cleaned up whatever baggage we've got, connected to who we really, really are, to have that existential strength to sit there in an emergence and allow it to go, and know that while you don't know where it's going, and it's bringing huge amounts of uncertainty
and sometimes emotion
and treading on some of your well-held beliefs that you use to orientate yourself in the world to navigate it, and it's coming with mystical stuff that you have no idea what it is, that you'll still be all right in the middle of it, right? And you can stay there.
And that really comes from you knowing who you are, you living at the centre of your life, and you understanding, not just understanding, it's knowing the relationship, and that the relationships are where all the stuff happens. It's in the relationships. And so, you know, the 3 of us have built relationships.
And we've achieved what I set out that time. And so now I can experience it, and I'm like, whoa.
Yeah. And so I'm hoping everyone will see that this latest podcast that we've just done, we all did what we were supposed to do. And so I think we will leave it there.
Indeed.
I have one thing to add. That I just want to tie in, because what I'm hearing is for me again, the simultaneous duality that's playing out. And I know it's important to acknowledge that. Because often when we grow in our journeys, whoever's listening, we get taught that there's right and wrong, or one way or another, and actually it's all in there, right?
Yes.
We also know, and what you spoke about, Bryn, what I'm hearing, the essence of what I'm hearing is, whilst things are not going the way you thought it would or planned, in the chaos, you are still being integrated, right?
Yes.
So I've got 2 images that I drew. One is simply a circle with a little circle on the inside, representing you at the center, balanced, grounded amongst the chaos, but very much aware and still connected.
Yes.
Right? The other one is a circle with a starting point and the end point where the starting point is. So it's a complete cycle. 2 ways of growing. So that one. And Ros, you mentioned earlier that you stopped seeing a client when you stopped learning from them, right? And I just want to acknowledge that while the words sound harsh, and viewers may see that as, maybe not. What I hear from that though, and what I pick up, because I know you and I know your practice and all of that, is communicating the journey together and being with someone and guiding them or holding space for them to actually do it themselves compared to helping someone else, right? And so for me, as a summary to this entire podcast, we're talking about communication and growth and what that looks like and how that happens. It's actually not one or the other. It's all in the chaos, but also in the complete cycle of ourselves and in our environment. So I don't know if that makes sense. It makes sense to me.
And it sure to make sense to some people and not to others, because that is life. We resonate with some and not with others. So, and we have this diversity.
Yeah. And I wrote as well in my other book that I don't have with me here around collective circular collaboration and what is required to ensure the sustainability and evolution of a collective circular collaboration.
Okay.
Which I just remembered then. And it was a reflection of everything we've talked about today. So yes, that's my knowing.
Yes. Well, thank you both.
There you go.
Thank you.